Wow. Maybe that's what it did. Sounded like it was recording it locally. Then I would have to move it to the cloud, which it took me a year to figure out that I could do, just record it straight to the cloud. Okay, let's see. We are in Genesis chapter 20/21. And we are in this part of the world. This is a map of the eastern half of the Mediterranean Sea, where I spent a considerable amount of time cruising when I was in the Navy, to the point where I had the eastern half of the whole eastern half of the Mediterranean memorized, like you would have East Lansing memorized if you lived here or something like that. Every geographic contour. But there's Egypt down to the south, where you see Hyksos, which would be where the Hebrews are assumed to have been enslaved. Then you have the Sinai. Then there's Canaan, which is the land of promise, where Abraham is, which is where our story is going to pick up. And then to the northeast and east, you have the terrain that will be on and off controlled by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. There's lots of archaeological digs that are going on right now of these cities, Nineveh and Babylon. It's really interesting. And the relationship between the two on YouTube. So I think I'm subscribed to a channel called Expedition Bible. He does a lot of this unfolding archaeological finds in Israel. This is all kinds of it. Israel and all the entire eastern portion there, the Mesopotamian area. But you can see there where Abraham and his family, actually Terah, his father, and his sons went out from Chaldea to Haran, up to the northwest, and then down to Canaan. And you get the sense that originally it was Terah who was ordered by God to depart Chaldea and head on. But then Terah died in Haran, after which his son was named. And then Abraham by himself with his nephew Lot went down to Canaan. And then you have the unfolding chaos of Abraham's life and of the narrative of Genesis. That's how I think of it, chaos. We talked about that last week. But right now we're in a story of Abimelech, who was king of the peoples who inhabit at this point this area right here, which is the land of the Philistines, which would become the Philistines, which I believe are actually Phoenicians, like the people of Tyre and Sidon up here. This is Phoenicia. And these peoples inhabited this whole, what do you want to call it, the Mediterranean basin on the south side here, all the way down to Carthage. So the Carthaginians, Hannibal and so forth, I believe they were Phoenicians as well. But they were heavy-duty traders. That was their thing, trade. They didn't so much care about occupying land, and you'll see that with the Philistines, because they'll go and they'll set up garrisons in Israel later on in the story of the Bible. But they never really conquer Canaan and take over the land. They just want your stuff. So they set up garrisons and they plunder, but they just have the 5 cities of the Philistines on the coast. And so they're just constantly plundering the Israelites until the time of David. So, another 1,000 years after this time right here. But anyway, Abraham has just relocated to Gerar, or Gerar, however you want to say it, where he's going to meet a king named Abimelech. And that's in the land of the Philistines, or what will become the land of the Philistines. So it's anachronistic. Reference to the Philistines is anachronistic in the sense that they're technically not the Philistines, but you get the sense, and that happens a lot in the Bible, because those are the words that would be meaningful to the people that they're writing to. But you get the sense that there's a reason he keeps using the term Philistine. Let me get rid of some stuff that you can't see, but that I can see. So, for example, in this chapter, how many times does he refer to? Not at all. Wait a minute. Am I in the right chapter? Maybe it's 21. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Two, it's only twice. But you can see, he references Philistines twice here at the end. He returned to the land of the Philistines, which we'll get to, and he stayed many days in the land of the Philistines. Well, in the time of the judges, this is the story of Samson. The judges would be, I don't know, 700 years after this or something like that. The Philistines will dominate Israel, and it will be Samson who will begin to be the guy who begins to throw off the yoke of the Philistines, which will take, I don't know, 100 years or something like that, whatever the number is. So you got to wonder, as he makes his way to the land of the Philistines in chapter 20, if part of the point, and the point of using the term Philistines here, right now he's not, it's just Gerar right here. Part of the point is this anticipation of the idea that Philistine territory is part of the promised land. They're going to have trouble with these people for 1,000 years, but Philistine territory belongs to the people, the children of the promise. And in anticipation of that, because we talk often about this, I'll get back to it in a minute, anticipation. In anticipation of that, you see Abraham sort of plant a flag with Abimelech in chapter 20, where they make this covenant. And is this the chapter where he, let's see here. Yeah, he digs a well. It's going to be chapter 21, excuse me. But for example, right here, you see, we'll close out chapter 20 with this. Am I in 20 yet? Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants, gave them to Abraham. See this covenant happening. Returned Sarah, his wife. We talked about that last week, where Abraham offers, I don't know what you want to call it, offers his wife to Abimelech, abandons her, resigns himself to the fact, I don't know. We'll get back to that in a second. But he says Abimelech is now going to make a covenant with Abraham concerning what happened with Sarah. So what happened with Sarah? The same thing that happened with Pharaoh. This is what we talked about last week, where in order to maintain relationships with the people of the land, he makes this accommodation, this concession, where he's got Sarah to agree to call him her brother instead of her husband. Well, why would you do that? And you would do that because the people of the land want you for some reason. Maybe it's to be part of a harem, maybe it's to be part of a slave group, but so that's what she does. And so Abimelech gets onto this because of God, because by taking Abraham's wife, he has violated the covenant of the promise, the promise of chapter 12. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So he takes Abraham's wife, and God curses him. And God is compassionate enough to preemptively do something about it without destroying Abraham, like he's going to destroy the Egyptians in Exodus, who also curse Israel, even though they're an idolatrous people at that point. And so Abimelech maintains his innocence. God agrees, and it's Abraham who walks away again with egg on his face, the one who looks like he's done the wrong. And you can see that the jab happened here after this whole thing happens. You can see it right here with this reference by Abimelech to, he's talking to Abraham. He says, "Build, I have given your brother," I'm sorry, he's talking to Sarah, "I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver." So he returns Sarah to Abraham, and he says to Sarah, "I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver to testify to the innocence, my innocence in this," although I don't really know how it testifies to his innocence. But he didn't call him he didn't call her your husband. It's your brother. As if he doesn't, you told me he was your brother, so we're your brother. You said that to me, so that's what I'm calling him. But go back to your brother. This is basically what he's saying. He's almost not acknowledging the fact that she's his wife. And it's this Not even subtle jab at both of them for what they're doing here. But again, as far as the portrayal of Abraham in this passage, you see it there in verse 13 in blue. Or let's go higher in verse 9. He says, "You have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin." That's what he accuses. It's a rhetorical question that assumes a yes answer, right? Why have you just assumed? Why have you done this to me? Why have you basically sinned against me? I don't know how else to say it. You have done to me things that ought not be done. This is immediately after God reaffirms the promise to him that he's going to have an heir within a year, Isaac. Then this thing happens, where you have the great patriarch, the object of the promise in 12, and the covenant in 15, the one about whom the author said Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now you have this foreign king, probably certainly idolatrous king, accusing him of doing things that ought not be done. And then Abraham responds, he said, "How can you do this to me? She's your wife." He says, "I did it because I thought there was no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides," this is the half-truth thing we talked about last week, "she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father," not that he cares, "the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother." Oh, that's good. At least it wasn't flat out incest, right? "And she became my wife." Now listen to the dodge. Listen to the dodging of responsibility. "And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said, can you just tell everybody you're my brother instead of my wife?" When God caused me to wander, it's like he's subtly absolving himself of all I didn't even want to be here. I'm only here because God caused me to be here. Wander is the word that he uses. I didn't even want to be here. So, how about a little understanding or something? I don't know, but it's a very strange dialogue. The whole thing is weird, but coming out of the mouth of the great patriarch, it's all very strange.
No, at the end there, when he's talking about he's healing all the women because they couldn't bear children. How much time? We don't know how much time passed, right?
Months.
Yeah. But when you're reading it, it almost sounds like he took Sarah as in his harem, and then the Lord spoke to him that night in a dream. But it must have taken longer than that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's take a look here. I don't know. It's
First. Yeah.
he just says he came to in a dream by night. It doesn't say
Yeah,
how long
that's
it's been. Yeah.
So she could have just been in this harem.
I can't imagine that it was too long.
I mean, you're going to find out really quick.
Even, yeah, you take somebody else's wife, even though they kind of lied about it in the process. God doesn't, I can't imagine God waited 2 months. I would have, my guess would be that night, after you put them in the harem, the Lord appeared
Well,
to them and
her point is that
The Lord had closed.
they had closed all the wombs. It takes a while to find that out.
right.
Was nobody growing up? Is that the only way they knew nobody was getting pregnant?
Well, they're just not having kids. I mean, it's important, right? To maintain these populations and the inheritances and so forth, that they have kids. So now all of a sudden nobody's having kids. That's the whole point of the harem. But all of a sudden nobody's having kids. I mean, it wouldn't take you long to figure that out. Why is nobody having kids? Why is nobody getting pregnant? It would take a few months to figure that out. I don't know. That's all you get.
Maybe they all miscarried.
There's that too. Yeah. But anyway, the larger picture is you see this blessing on Abraham in spite of himself. Got nothing to do, even after the declaration, it was reckoned to him as righteousness. It's got nothing to do with his exemplary behavior. Even though in a minute God's going to say that to Isaac, Abraham obeyed me. Because this seems kind of permanent. This seems like I mean, when you take the woman into your harem, it's not like, hey, rent her to me
Yeah.
for a year and then I'll give her back to you. This is a permanent kind of thing. So,
Yeah, didn't Abraham think, oh, man. this
it's
is a
just like,
lot.
he's gonna go, what is he doing now? Is he going, oh, well, because he was the one who went to the land of the Philistines. He just uprooted from Mamre and he went there. And you're gonna see him, we'll talk about the fact that he seems to move around a lot. So the Abimelech calls him your brother. Abraham says she's my wife and my sister. Abimelech calls her his sister by inference. And then the narrator returns to explicitly say Abraham's wife, which I find interesting.
God, that we don't have the whole conversation between God and Abimelech.
No, we don't.
God could have told him that this will be punishment too, that he touched Sarah, so.
Another example of a foreign king in the land of the Philistines. The narrator goes out of his way to portray the innocence of that man versus one of the characters in the narrative. That's one of the heroes. It's a very strange thing, but it's a relatively frequent thing. And it's often true with the Egyptians, in spite of what happens with the Exodus, with the fact that they're enslaved. The Egyptians, Hagar would be an example of that. Egyptians come out looking pretty good. And it'll be to Egypt that Joseph will take Mary to keep her safe. And then out of Egypt, I called my son. So what was the land of slavery from which they were rescued by the time of Jesus in the plan of God, by the time of Jesus will become the place of rescue.
But Egypt is saved at the very end too. Egypt and one other country, which I can't remember now. I'm not good at names of things. This is Kay, by the way. Egypt is said to be one of the saved countries. That Egypt and I actually think it said Syria and Israel. All three will be God's in the very end. There's one little verse about that. I think it's in Isaiah. And it just blows my mind to think about. He calls Israel his inheritance, and he has a name for the other two too, that he's claiming them as his own. The Lord is. It's really cool.
Well, this is an interesting word study because Egypt is mentioned by the time of the exile in 587 or even 722 in the Northern Kingdom, Egypt plays no role. They haven't played a role for 700 years since the Exodus. But Jeremiah was one of the prophets that lived on both sides of the exile before and after. Ezekiel was an exilic prophet. But in those two books, where in a land where in a story that Egypt's played no role in for all that time, look at those mentions, 113 between those two books. I don't know what they are, but that could be what Kay is referring to. Hosea gets 13, that's a small book. So it is interesting how prominent Egypt is just by a word study in the prophetic portion of the Bible, meaning, yeah. Might be worth a little study. Okay. What else do I want to say about the story? So Abimelech's non-sin. He maintains his innocence. God agrees with him. And then God says, actually, I was the one that kept you from sinning. Remember, this is the guy, Abraham starts this with, Abraham defends himself by saying, they have no fear of God here. Why did you do this to me? There's no fear of God at all in this place. Well, wait a minute. Look at the story. Look at the dialogue that just transpired between Abimelech and God himself.
Mm-hmm.
You sure about that? Why are you saying? I mean, that doesn't make any. Did you just, are you just making that up or is it really true? Because Abimelech here is looking pretty good in the eyes of God. God is protecting him. Why would God do that? I don't know. It seems to me that I'm not convinced. I never take it for granted that these people are being virtuous because there's too many instances in the narrative where they are not virtuous. And so I don't give them the benefit of the doubt when they say, Abraham in my mind is there's no benefit of the doubt right here with what he's doing with, nobody should say regarding his behavior, I can understand why he would do that and defend it from the vantage point of himself as a child of the promise. It's the second time it's happened like this. Pharaoh also appeared more righteous when Abraham did exactly the same thing to him. And Abraham got enriched by Pharaoh. And in a sense, he, as I've said before, in anticipation of the Exodus, when the Israelites will plunder the Egyptians in fulfillment of the promise in Genesis 15, Abraham prefigures that plundering because he was enriched greatly by the Pharaoh in Egypt. And so he, in a sense, plunders the Egyptians when he leaves Egypt. So he leaves Egypt to go back to Canaan, and the Egyptians give him all sorts of things. And then X number of 100 years later, all Israel will leave Egypt, and they will give them all sorts of things to do it as they leave Egypt and go back to Canaan. So there's two returns. There's two sets of journeying to Egypt and then journeying back to Canaan. And in both cases, the peoples involved are enriched by the Egyptians and cast out, essentially. Because
God
Abraham,
providing, don't you think?
say again?
Don't you think it's just God providing their needs before they actually even are going to need it? I mean, when it's necessary, it's
Yeah, I
there
think
just like the gold and frankincense for Jesus to travel to Egypt. You know, I mean, God over and over shows that he provides when it's needed.
and then there's this thing about the blessing and the cursing of the covenant, right? I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you.
That's
And so
true too.
you see the enemies of the people of God as defined. You don't get to decide whether you're an enemy of the people of God. He decides that for you. In a sense, he decides who the people of God are. And then he makes the delineations. And so these peoples, the Egyptians in two cases, then enrich the Israelites by virtue of the fact that they're the people of God. And they have, in a sense that, in the only sense that matters in the eyes of God, they have cursed the people of God. But in the process of supposedly cursing the people of God, they maintain their innocence in this case, and God affirms their innocence. So he makes them pay. You're going to see all the stuff. But you're just simply seeing the blessings of the covenant, the blessings of the covenant on the recipient of the promise. And the blessings come through, in this case, the nations surrounding Canaan, Egypt. Let's see, Pharaoh expelled Abraham from Egypt, but Abimelech, he invites him to stay. They're going to make a covenant eventually. And so you have a very rich guy. You have two very rich guys making a covenant. And so it's mutually beneficial, I suppose. All of that animosity that we see later on, like with the Amorites and so forth, that's all future. For the moment, Abraham is in here and he's making covenants with these people, which is partly of what the harem is all about. How the harem gets stocked, if I can use a crass term.
Oh, I was just thinking of what Sharon said about the timing. If you go to Esther, look how long she had to be prepared to go to the king.
Long time.
Yeah. She had to have all those baths and the oils and beautification.
And it still might not have been enough, what happened to be in this case, because God was going before her, if you will.
Right, but I'm thinking that could be an example of how much time it might have kind of elapsed before they realized the problems. The problem, that is.
Yeah.
This one ends interesting also because the Lord had closed, so they, verse 17, Abraham prayed to God. That's interesting. Abraham, who is clearly the one who is chastised for being non-virtuous, is chastised by the king who is portrayed as virtuous. But the guy who is presented as being duplicitous is the one who has to pray to God. It just, all this being a prophet, like Balaam, excuse me, all this stuff has nothing to do with virtue. It just doesn't. And here's another, he calls him a prophet. Is that here?
Yeah, the first section when God came. to
Yeah.
him, a couple of the-
You've wronged a prophet. Yeah, but the prophet did me wrong. Doesn't matter. You wronged a prophet, so fix it. I didn't let it go too far. I stopped it before it went too serious, but you're going to fix it. And then he's going to pray for you, and then all will be well. But at the end of the result is that Abraham is now praying to God on behalf of a foreign king, so that that foreign king's women will bear children when his own wife is barren. And that's how the narrative closes, with healed his wife and his female slaves so that they bore children. Whereas Sarah, the one that he took, it is barren. And he sends her back to, so far, back to Abraham barren while his women continue to bear children. I guess it's all in the hands of God, right? They bear children because they stop bearing children because he wants them to stop bearing children. Then they bear children because he blesses them to bear children. And the same thing is going to be true of Sarah. And that's 20. That's the weird story of Abimelech.
But it's not over yet because eventually Abimelech says, you need to leave because they start transitioning over to the wells and all that stuff. So
In that sense, it's almost as if the story of Isaac is this little parentheses in the midst of the story about Abimelech. Because it starts here in 20, then there's this little section on the birth of Isaac, all this waiting to get to the birth of Isaac, and then it's going to be right back to Abimelech. In fact, it's going to be right back to Ishmael, and then back to Abimelech. So, all these loose ends that we don't think matter necessarily, they all get tied up. And we got to figure out why they matter. Why does it matter what's happening why did Abraham go to the land of to the Gerar? Why does it matter? And why does Abimelech matter in the grand scheme of the history of redemption and of the promise? And we'll get back to that. I'll take a shot. I'll take a shot at being wrong. All right. And we'll move on to, you always want to take these, you never study these stories in isolation. Just like in a movie, you never watch a scene in isolation. Directors, good directors, any director tries, good directors are effective. At every scene and everything that happens in the scene and every 60-second increment in the movie propels a larger story forward. So each scene has its own story. I don't know. Pick any Steven Spielberg movie. Every scene has its own story in it, is self-contained, and then also makes sense in a larger narrative, and you're not sure where it's going. But you need each of those stories. You continue to pay attention to the individual stories so that you can understand the larger story. And sometimes as you continue to move through the storytelling, you learn something that totally changes the larger story. And you rattle your head and go, oh, wait a minute, I don't understand that. And look what happened here. And the directors that are really good at that, man, those stories are unbelievable. The great example of that is Shawshank Redemption. That's just a great example. I mean, there's a bunch of them. The Sixth Sense, which a really raw one that I don't recommend because it's so raw, is Fight Club. But these kinds of stories, where they throw a curveball at you, you just watch one called The Game, which jerks you this way and then that way and then this way, and that really effective. But that's the Bible. In the Bible, you know the story where it's supposed to go at the beginning, from the very beginning. And then as you move through the storytelling, you go, how in the world can we possibly get there? This is such a mess. And then the situation gets resolved and we move on to the next crisis. And in that sense, the entire Bible, the entire Old Testament is crisis management from the human perspective as you move through it. So you finally get to he's been promised the land in chapter 15 with the covenant, but they end up as slaves in Egypt. That's weird because they're already in Canaan, the land that they're promised. He relocates the entire tribes, the whole clan from Canaan after the promise, after the covenant, out of Canaan into Egypt, where they are a slave people. That's a crisis. Then they get out of Egypt in Exodus. Then they totally screw up and they end up wandering they get turned away by God himself. Nope, you're not going into the land. Right on the cusp of getting there. You're not going into the land. Crisis. They're going to wander for 40 years. So they're wandering around and that whole generation dies, everybody under 20. Crisis management. So they finally take the land, but they don't kick out all of the natives or exterminate them, the Canaanites. And so they're a constant thorn in the flesh. And so this period of the judges unfolds, which is a book of one crisis after another. Boom, 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 boom. Some of it's self-inflicted, all of it's self-inflicted, but like the story we talked about with the near extermination of Benjamin by the rest of the tribes. Some of it's internally generated, and then you got the Midianites, you got these different people plundering the Egyptians and so forth. But it's all crisis management, one after the other. You get into the period of the kings with Saul, and the Philistines are back. It's crisis management again, as they had immediately with Samuel. They have this war with the Philistines, and the Philistines win. Crisis management. Then you get to David, you go, oh, okay, we're all set. It's going to move forward now. Nope. Bathsheba and Uriah, the Hittite. And then there's the ensuing coup by his own son Absalom, where he gets run out of the country. What in the world? After he's told in 2 Samuel 7, you're going to be on the throne. Your descendants are going to be on the throne forever. Within a few chapters, he's on his way out. He's going over across the Jordan, ironically, where there's safety on the other side. And then you finally end up, and then it's just total chaos with all the evil kings, crisis management. Then you end up with the exile. The northern exile in 722 BC, southern exile in 587 BC. And the population is carted off into Babylon or Assyria, and that's the end of Israel. Then they come, it just goes on and on, right through the time of Jesus. Oh, okay, they got their Savior. They got their Messiah, great. Nope. Jerusalem is exterminated. Israel is exterminated in 70. There is no, Judea. It's, the Bible is crisis management from the chaos of Genesis 1, 2, all the way until the new heavens and the new earth happen. And at the end of the Revelation, it's just crisis. Weird. Not the story.
You just gave a very good reason for the Bible saying God is long suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, I said last week, that's just how he does his best work. He does his best work in the midst of the messes. He's not in the business of doing trim work. What do you call it? Finish work on well-made houses. He doesn't do the finish work. He takes a pile of rubble and he builds a masterpiece, but he starts with a pile of rubble. And he starts with bad people.
Didn't it say, basically there was like nothing over the water or anything, you know, I mean, it was just all nothingness and he made everything from it. So,
Without form.
yeah, yeah, void. That's the word I was trying to think. Thank you. You helped me get to that. Yeah, it's all void. So he made everything out of nothing. I wish I could do that.
Yep. So in spite of Abraham voluntarily giving up his wife twice, here we are finally in
Do you think
21.
you learned? Is that why there wasn't a third time?
Well, I think there's no third time because there's no point. God has made his point that
Yeah.
he's going to fulfill his promise. And he's also set it in stone. This time next year I will return and Sarah will have a son. And what did she do when he said that?
She laughed.
She laughed. So guess what word we're going to see twice in this narrative? The Lord visited Sarah as he had said. There's fulfillment. Here we see it. Promise, anticipation, fulfillment. This is the textbook case. Promise. In 12, God appears a year early and says, yep, this time next year, there's anticipation on his way to, he's multitasking, on his way to Sodom, to destroy Sodom and save Lot. Talk about multitasking. And now, so we move from promise to anticipation, and now we have fulfillment in 21. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, to emphasize this is impossible. At the time of which God had spoken to him, fulfillment. Not a random time, but exactly the time which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, fulfillment, whom Sarah bore to him. Not Hagar, not a concubine, not somebody else. Sarah, as God had promised, he reiterates it right here, whom Sarah had borne to him, Isaac. And Abraham did what he did, what he promised, what he was covenanted to do in chapter 17. Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded to him. So everything is now unfolding according to God's word. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. At me? With me? You know, I don't know. I don't know enough Hebrew to know why they chose over right there. And she said, who would have said that? Nobody is the answer, the rhetorical answer to this question. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have
I
borne
think
him.
maybe a good word, it makes sense to me anyway, is rejoice over her. Rejoice with her, you know, that
That
she
could be.
finally had a son.
He must be using the word, it must be the same word that's used earlier when Sarah laughed and then God said, why did she laugh? And then how did that go? Let's go back there first. Is that 19? Is it 3 times? 18? Laugh. A lot of laugh, right? I'm assuming it's the same word. So it's not a coincidence. It's on purpose. Sarah laughed. The Lord, Yahweh himself says, why did Sarah laugh? Sarah says, I did not laugh. He says, no, you did laugh. Now, Gad gets the last laugh. And
That's true. God did get the last laugh. Very good.
now she laughs again. The irony could not have been lost on her. And I'm convinced that's why it's in there. This time it's just Yahweh who appears. The Lord visited Sarah How did he visit her? I don't know. 3 men visited Abraham, one of whom was him. 2 men visited Lot, who were the other 2 that visited Abraham. And now one is going to visit. You really see, this is, God takes care of this business personally in this part of the narrative. From that scene to this, God is personally overseeing these events.
God has a way of reminding us of our mistakes sometimes. I mean, look at Christ, Peter. He told Peter, "You're going to deny me 3 times," and it came to pass that a few hours later. And then when Jesus in John 21, when Jesus was pretty close to going up, being extended back up to heaven, he took Peter away, or he took Peter and said, "Do you love me?" And he did it 3 times. So here God is doing the same thing to Sarah. You laughed twice, and Abraham laughed. Now, God has made me laugh, laughter for me, and everyone who hears me will laugh over me. A year later, basically, Sarah is being reminded of how much she really didn't believe God, that he was going to do what he said he was going to do. Kind of reminder, you didn't believe, but the promise is actually come true.
The first laughter is a laughing stock, and everyone who hears will laugh, and when they laugh is to mock, place forward, and come.
So
That laugh, the second laugh is the same as the first laugh when that Sarah did, is to mock and explore.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
so-
interesting. You said that. There was a Jewish man here in Rockport with us, and one day I was coming out of the post office and I started to talk to him about the Lord too. And he just kind of stopped me and he said, "Nobody's going to ever convince me a 90-year-old woman had a child." That's kind of what you just said, isn't it?
could anybody convince him that, okay, so is he convinced that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth?
Well, I figured if he wasn't convinced of that, he probably wasn't convinced of anything else. I mean,
So you'd
I
believe
love-
that
I
in
love
the beginning
that
God created,
couple. I love that couple, and I did get to share my testimony with his wife, but he was not one to listen.
you know,
So,
It is-
and they both passed.
uh-oh,
Yeah, yeah.
nuts. Jody
Well,
wanted, I'm
he-
sorry, Jody wanted does anybody have Jody's, it's too late. Oh, well.
sorry.
No, not you. I'm sorry. I'm doing 2 things at once, Kay. I just found out that somebody that normally participates right now doesn't have the link. So they missed it. And I just noticed it.
Did she send you text? Is that what she did?
Yeah, she must not have her email. Although I sent it this morning.
JODSTER.
Yeah, can you send her the link? It's too late on this. Well, anyway, sorry, Kay.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. Yeah, I really hated that, I never was able to make any inroads, but that's kind of way the Lord says most of the Jews are going to be until he steps in here nearer the end,
I think you either believe in the supernatural or you don't. And if you believe that, why is it hard to believe that God makes the sun stop?
It isn't hard for me to believe it,
or-
but it is for a lot of people.
Or makes a donkey talk? Do you
Yeah.
believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth? Yes, I do. All right. Are you saying that making a donkey talk is more ridiculous than that? Why is that? Why is it a bigger deal? Why is it ridiculous to believe that he made a donkey talk? Sounds like one word. When He created the heavens and the earth, which most
They-
people acknowledge. I don't understand. You either buy into miracles or you don't. And once you do, that's why scientists won't allow it at all. Because once you let miracles in the door, you can't, no longer is the universe entirely predictable. No longer does the universe unfold according to natural law, according to physical law. Get rid of the word natural there, but according to physical law. E equals mc squared, F equals ma. These, these formulas that govern the physical universe, that are, from the vantage point of science, the Bible of the universe, that are inviolable. Well, if there's a God who superintends, then they're not inviolable. He can manipulate them anytime he wants, or suspend them, or change them if he wanted to. That's what guarantees the uniformity of the unfolding universe. And that's why God is repulsive from a scientific standpoint, although for a lot less scientists than you might imagine. God is repulsive to the very, is corrosive to the very idea of modern science. Because modern science is the study of a uniformly, mechanistically evolving universe. From the interstellar sphere, galaxies, Andromeda, these other galaxies, to the Milky Way, all the way down to the molecular level. And that's why they're looking for evolutionary law. There's this hunt for life on other planets. And I'm on one hand, I'm thinking, all right, well, you say life on Earth originated in a sense by chance, which is to say, by the selectability, if you will, of random mutational change. So mutations happen; some of them are beneficial, and they result in a greater production of offspring for those descendants, and so they outbreed these others. Differential reproduction. That's what, and that all unfolds by chance, unpredictably. But then the way you talk about discovering potentially life on these other, like Titan or Europa, or other exoplanets, planets outside of our solar system, you sound as if you think it's mechanistic. That necessarily, if you have water and a heat source, like under the surface of Titan, if you have a body of water with heat, that you necessarily will get life. Well, which is it? Is it mechanistic? Is it random mutation by natural selection, purely by chance, in an unpredictable fashion, or is it predestination? Is it by some kind of evolutionary law?
Well, I think the rejection of miracles really is explained by the verse that says men love darkness rather than the light because their deeds are evil, neither cometh to the light, lest their deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds might be made manifest, that they are wrought of God. And so I think those that really want to do their own thing are just never going to want to come to a belief in the miraculous because, oh, they might have to change what they
Changes everything.
do.
It's a question of, this love of physical law. Well, I happen to believe in physical law, but I also happen to believe that what comes with it is moral law. That morality is an objective thing. There is an objective fact of the matter in the world.
Yes.
It is objectively true, for example, to use a famous one in philosophy, that torturing babies for fun is wrong, is evil. It is objectively true for everyone, everywhere, at all times.
Yes.
That is a moral law. It'd be easier for me to conceive of believe that I didn't make this up either. But it'd be easier for me to believe that the sun rises in the west and sets in the east than it would be to believe that torturing babies for fun is not evil. That's how settled and absolute moral law can be. It's more fundamentally settled and intrinsic to the universe than physical law is. He does not change moral law. He does not suspend moral law. We are all under moral law. Our conscience is guided by moral law. Physical law, he can do whatever he wants with, and he does. The resurrection of Jesus, the greatest, the second greatest, the greatest act in human history was the incarnation of God, God becoming man. And the second greatest act was the resurrection of God. Those are the two greatest acts in human history, both of which involve some kind of manipulation, suspension, sovereignty over, mastery over physical law. The moral law, they won't acknowledge moral law. They're all about physical law. Can I get a nod in the direction of moral law here? What are you talking about? What do you say? What's right depends on the individual. No, that doesn't work. If that was true, then human society could never work. If everybody did if the whole world operated according to Judges, the last verse of Judges, everyone did what was right in his own eyes, there would be no civilization. Obviously, that's not true.
That's the
Okay.
way we've been though, unfortunately, which is why the Lord's gonna put an end one day.
And now I gotta stop after that little rant.
No, it was a good rant.
All right, I'll go ahead and stop now. This is summer stuff. This is the sort of stuff we talk about in the summer, which we got to make a decision about, by the way. Eventually, what to do this summer? Do we continue with Genesis or do we divert to one of these things we talked about in the past, like some of the culture war issues or postmodernism, where are we now? What on earth has happened? How did we get here to this current moral chaos? That's where we are, right? This is what happens when you let moral chaos, moral license in the door. You end up with exactly what's going on in the Western world right now.
Sadly.
We'll talk about that later. I would like to kind of do the stuff that we've done in the past on culture and so forth, Christianity and culture and so forth. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop.
Bye, Kay.
Bye, Kay. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, bye, Sharon, and bye, Gary. Have a
Yep.
good day.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.